Hello, and welcome to Hospice Insights, the Law and Beyond, where we connect you to what matters in the ever-changing world of hospice and palliative care.
Where is the line? When does poor quality of care create false claims liability? Jonathan, this is a blast from the past. Not you, but like this subject, because I felt like when I started my legal career 25 years ago, we were talking about this kind of worthless services. I was doing a bunch of nursing home work back at that time. And so I feel like late 90s, early 2000s, this was a thing. But there's a new case we're going to talk about that there was a settlement on that has this theory of liability about when care is so substandard that the government shouldn't pay for it and billing for it is false.
Yeah, I guess this is, I guess things in DOJ world are cyclical because, this is back. And I guess at some point we could talk about whether this is a sign of things to come or an outlier. But certainly an interesting one. I'm glad we're talking about it.
So give me a rundown. What is this current case? I know it came out of Ohio. And again, as with many False Claim Act cases, we're not talking about something that actually went to a jury or a judge. I mean, this is a settlement where essentially the provider, which I think up until fairly recently, most false claim cases settle, right? I mean, AseraCare happened in our hospice space and that went to litigation, that whole saga. But I mean, a lot of things are settled. So I think this was like a $2 or $3 million settlement for a not-for-profit nursing home in Ohio, which, I mean, I guess the specifics aren't like overly interesting, but I guess give us a little flavor of what went on there. And
yeah, Meg, this is actually a really good example of why these cases settle, because there's a lot of history that builds up to this settlement. And I think once we explain to our listeners what that history is, they're going to understand, okay, I get why they settled this, even though the worthless services theory is something that I think everyone agrees is a bit of a stretch when we're plugging that into the False Claims Act. But the background here, Meg, as you said, this is an Ohio-based nonprofit. I guess it's a chain of nursing homes operating throughout that area of the world. This actually started with DOJ filing suit in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. And so Eastern District of Pennsylvania, that's a great office. They've got a really good, experienced affirmative civil group. They're seen as pretty aggressive, but that's where this started. June of 2022. Not a key tam. This is a proactive case that DOJ filed on its own in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania against this Ohio-based chain of nonprofits. And what happened is they just immediately start litigating this. The nursing home, they file a good motion to dismiss. They're arguing the things that I would argue that, hey, there's a big difference here between negligent care and worthless care. One of those violates the False Claims Act. The other one should be like a med-mal type thing. And that gets fully briefed, denied by the judge in early 2023. And then from there,
Hey, Jonathan, just for our legal 101, we have a lot of non-lawyer listeners. I mean, just because someone loses summary judgment, that's not a surprise, because essentially, right, to lose on summary judgment, which is what the nursing home lost on summary judgment?
No, on a motion to dismiss.
Motion to dismiss. Yeah. But either way, it's a high bar to get something dismissed, even when a motion to dismiss or a summary judgment too, because it's like you have to say there's like for summary judgment, no facts in dispute. Like, what's the standard? So just to give some flavor for things.
Yeah, sure. So when you're dealing, so motion dismiss comes first. And essentially what you're saying is, judge, don't let this get into discovery. Let's not exchange documents and everything, because if you take all of the allegations in the complaint as true, they still can't win. And that's what the defense almost always does in False Claims Act cases, because there's pretty clear case law about what is and is not a False Claims Act violation. And here, the defense made those arguments and said, "Look, Judge, let's say that let's say that everything in the complaint is true. You still can't say that these are worthless services in violation of the False Claims Act." The next step, Meg, as you mentioned, is summary judgment. That's after discovery. That's after you take depositions, exchange all of the documents, and that's when you fully brief something up and say, "Look, Judge, here are a bunch of things that we don't think are in dispute," and you can then use those to say who wins and who loses. And where you get to a trial is if a judge hears the summary judgment motions and says, "All right, well, there's enough in dispute here that I need a fact finder, a jury, to weigh in on these factual disputes and pick who's the winner and who's the losers." That's way oversimplified civil litigation.
No, sure.
Yeah.
But that's just sort of helpful to have, because when you hear the provider lost a motion to dismiss, it's not like, oh, geez, they must have done something wrong necessarily, because that's hard to win. Sometimes,
Meg,
I mean, yeah.
And to be honest, Meg, in my experience, the courts are pretty deferential. When it's DOJ filing a complaint, they're pretty deferential to DOJ, where they want to. They're usually not going to. When it's a whistleblower, sometimes they'll take a bit of a harder look. But usually when it's DOJ making the accusations, and they have the right accusations, most of the time courts are going to be pretty deferential to DOJ's complaints.
So, and you mentioned, because again, this is just sort of to put this into context, because most of the things you and I talk on this podcast is when there's a whistleblower, and you sort of know that because you get the whistleblower files a complaint under seal. You get the civil investigative demand, fancy word for subpoena, for like a zillion records, like everything you ever did, like for 10 years. So you just mentioned there was the suit filed and this motion to dismiss before discovery. And so because DOJ did this on their own, you didn't have the civil investigative demand process. So how much discovery happened? Because I know a lot of these nursing home cases, like back in the day, it's like comes up through a survey, like a state survey. And so you have all these allegations that the state survey agency already found and whatever. But I guess, can you say a little bit about how much did they really know? Because you're saying they didn't do full discovery yet.
No. So, all right. So let me try to fix that. So there wasn't a key tam here. DOJ filed something proactively, but that doesn't mean the DOJ doesn't have CID power before they file the suit. So DOJ can serve CIDs so long as they have a reasonable suspicion that someone's violated the False Claims Act. And so here, I don't really know. We can't tell from the docket how this got on their radar, but almost certainly there were CIDs that were issued to this nonprofit before they filed suit. And so really the existence of a whistleblower doesn't really impact how DOJ is going to approach that investigation. They just they lacked that whistleblower who comes in and says, they knew what they were doing was wrong. Sometimes that's a pretty key thing in these investigations, because these are, they have to prove knowledge. But here they figured this out some other way, and DOJ launched into their investigation and then at some point filed a complaint.
So I guess the bad news is, when you're dealing with the CID, that's not even really discovery. If this goes further, there's going to be even more things, which a lot of it I'd imagine would be talking to people. I mean, there's interrogatories and CIDs, right, where you have to answer, but they're not taking interviews and stuff. Because what is it that they could have learned that they hadn't learned yet, like between a CID and like discovery?
Yeah. So great question, Meg. So really, DOJ gets two bites at the apple. They get pretty much all the discovery tools during the CID investigative process. And so they can figure all this stuff out. But what almost always happens is they file the complaint and they're starting to litigate. And then they're starting to piece together, what would a trial look like? What would our summary judgment motion look like? And they start to say, okay, there's other things that we need. And so DOJ will get a bunch of stuff during the CID, during the investigative stage. And then once they've filed something, they start saying, okay, well, we need 17 different things. That's what everything that happens in civil cases and criminal cases with DOJ as well, as you get on the eve of trial and you realize, oh, I sure could use this extra stuff. The only difference is during the CID process, that's a one-way discovery thing. You're not, I can't subpoena DOJ or a federal agency during that time and ask for stuff, but you can. When it's after they've filed the complaint, you can absolutely serve agencies, the United States, all this discovery process, and get all these answers so that you can mount your defense.
Got it. So back to this case. So they did, maybe there was a state survey, who knows? But then they did a lot of their own digging through this investigative tool, CID. They think there's enough evidence of poor quality, and they resurrect this worthless services theory of liability after looking at all of this stuff, which, as you say, I think, there is, when you think of poor quality of care, it's like, wow, there's a whole survey and certification process which finds people if they're, breaching standards of care as defined by the government. You also have, private med mal litigation. And so the redundancy here, because I just have to assume that there's probably survey citations and fines that they've already paid for whatever is claimed to be substandard here. But this is like the cherry on the top. Let's take, not just fines, but trouble, damages, blah, 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 which is, high stakes, because it's about the money you paid, not just like a fine. So they decided to do this. So they do all this CID work, they find this stuff, and then they made this choice. So I know when we were conversing about doing this podcast, you were like, sure, Meg, this is a worthless services. I haven't seen one of those for a while because it came across my desk and I was like, oh, this is a full circle moment. And obviously this is on our Hospice Insights podcast, but I always say that, hospice regulatory action and otherwise is like 10 and 15 years behind like nursing homes and other things. So this piqued my interest because we know that false claim activity in hospice is very robust. Now, maybe there's so much other bad stuff going into hospice, they don't even need to get to quality of care. So there's enough that DOJ doesn't need to stretch itself when you have people paying, kickbacks and not even providing services, much less worthless. There were no services provided. So, but that was my angle here is like, there's changes that are happening in hospice right now in terms of quality reporting and other things that is this sort of a next gen problem that hospices might have as we get concerned more about quality. And we know that the survey process, due to recent changes, that's starting to look more like nursing homes, and like we can have bad things happen to us and get fined and all these bad things that, nursing homes have been dealing with. So that was sort of my, interest in this in particular one, is this going to be a frequent thing? And then two, could hospices be next in line for this? Because at least, in my world, you do run into people complaining about hospice and you killed my loved one, or, you didn't respond fast enough, whatever. Usually, though, worthless services, there's like egregious stuff going on, like pretty, like that's not just like a service failure. That's like but tell me your thoughts, because I know what I think already. I want to know what you think.
Yeah. I don't think this is the start of the next big wave of worthless services cases. I mean, if you think about how worthless services cases work, I mean, back the FCA comes out of the Civil War, where you've got these egregious stories of defense contractors providing the Union Army with things that were genuinely worthless, things that they just didn't want. And so, if you think about like how the government was buying things back then, worthless services does make sense. The issue is the government doesn't buy things now the way it used to. And so you really don't need worthless services to have actionable stuff under FCA, because when contractors are paying hospice claims, they're relying on all of these implied certifications that hospice providers know really, really well. And so if DOJ or a whistleblower is going to bring a claim against a hospice, they're almost certainly not going to say this was totally worthless. They're going to ground that in some actual requirement, under some regulation that says X. And they're going to say, look, hospice needed to do X in order to get paid. That's a condition of payment. They didn't do X. And that's what it's going to be about. The issue here, Meg, is they didn't have that X. There wasn't, in the nursing home world, there isn't a really clear standard where DOJ or whistleblowers can come in and say, here's the X, here's the actual thing you didn't do. And so you get this parade of horribles talking about how bad the conditions were, and then you try to loop that in with some general thing. And here the judge said, look, there's this standard from the Nursing Home Reform Act that says that nursing homes have to care for residents in such a manner and in such an environment as will promote maintenance or enhancement of the quality of life for each resident. That's it. Like that's the whole thing. And so the judge here said, look, that's the standard, and there's a way that you can violate that and therefore violate the False Claims Act, and then listed the just parade of horribles that was going on allegedly in these nursing homes to sustain that. But I don't think that's really something. I mean, potentially you can see that as a theory in some hospice cases, but I think there's more concrete things that would be a better route for DOJ and whistleblowers to go.
Well, it is interesting because obviously back in the day I did sort of all different kinds of post-acute care work, and then focused on hospice like 7 years into my career. Decided to just do that. But the regulatory structure of hospice is a little bit different. Like you have these 6 conditions of payment, and then you have this, what I say is the nucleus of every hospice false claim case is ineligibility for care. Because we have a 6-month prognosis standard, or if it's like inpatient care, you had to have acute symptoms that couldn't be managed in the home kind of thing. And then we have these other conditions of payment. And then obviously there's anti-kickback things that come up in a lot of hospice cases because, we're trying to work with facilities and get referrals from them and physicians and other things. And so you're right, like the regulatory scheme for nursing homes is a little bit different, but this is my personal commentary. It just seems like, why pound people more? Shut them down if you think they're so bad, but don't do this. So again, my personal Meg on her soapbox here is like, if DOJ is so concerned about that these people are doing bad care that's so catastrophic, then that's what Survey Search should do. You can terminate providers for substandard quality of care, which yes, you have an administrative hearing process, but CMS wins those cases, so it perplexes me too, where either it's not that bad and these other things can police that, or then don't just have them pay a bunch of fines and then think that like everything's going to be okay. And I don't know. I too don't necessarily like the feel of this in terms of from a public interest standpoint.
Yeah.
Because I think if someone is so bad that they probably shouldn't be in business or something, then which is an easier road to move forward with, or get them to sell to someone else, or, there's lots of different things you can do to push someone out. So But so why would one, I know we're just playing pontificating dream world here, but why would a prosecutor do that? I mean, it just seems like this is a lot of work. You have like endless cases you can probably pursue. This is a hard road. Why does one do this?
Yeah, all good points, Megan. And let's make clear, like, we're not defending that we're not saying that nursing homes should do to their patients what these nursing homes were allegedly doing to their patients. You know, it's obviously bad to leave patients in soiled sheets and to not, feed them. Those are again, not things that we're saying should happen. But this is very much, Meg, I think what you're getting at is this is very much a round peg in a square hole type situation. This is the False Claims Act was designed to go after knowing fraud, and this is not knowing fraud. This is something else. This is negligence. This is if it's intentional, then that's an intentional tort. I mean, there's all these things that the patients have remedies to do. And there are all these licensure and state level authorities that could shut these places down. And so, Meg, I'm with you. This is not the type of thing that I would expect DOJ to want to spend a lot of time on, but they do. I think one of the things that came up, especially during the Biden administration, was more a bigger emphasis on finding cases where there were real victims. And I think what you could do is if you're told to go find cases where there are elderly victims, this looks a lot like that. There are real victims in this. A lot of times in False Claims Act cases, you don't have a ton of, patients who are victims. I mean, it is clear here, if the allegations are true, this is a sad situation that was going on in these nursing homes. But that doesn't mean that the False Claims Act is the answer. And so this was I think these were DOJ attorneys who were told, find cases where there are elderly victims. And this was the most readily, made one to them. Doesn't mean it should have been brought under the False Claims Act. I'm with you, Meg. The better thing here would have been, shut them down. If they should have been shut down, shut them down, or do something else from an administrative side. Let the patients file class actions or whatever they do. But the False Claims Act seems like the wrong mechanism for this.
Yeah. I just think that, I mean, I strongly believe in elder rights and I am, perplexed when it's like, there are so many things from a survey and certification standpoint, like you can get, a monitor and temporary management, and you can put a lot of things into which, again, now those are available for hospices through survey citations too. It just seems like when we're dealing with quality of care and you don't think people are doing a good job, it just seems like why are we doing things? Because it isn't really protecting the quote victims here. Like swift action should probably be taken and not years of litigation that goes on and whatever to, what you're going to get a CID or something at the end, a CIA at the end of this or something. I mean, there's just, so yeah, I was frustrated sort of reading this because it just feels like there's better ways to handle, and that's especially in healthcare, which is so highly regulated for quality through, survey processes and other things. And especially nursing homes are subject not to just accrediting bodies, private companies that are surveying them. It's like state survey agencies. So you're getting a hard look from government enforcement, not people you pay to, do your surveys. So, I mean, there's a lot of regulation there, but this is the world according to Meg, and it's so simple to solve these problems, right?
Yeah. Well, but Meg, I think what the big takeaway for me in this is I think you're right. I was frustrated as well reading this, and I have to think, given the way the case law is in the worthless services area, if they kept litigating, I think they eventually would have won. But I think it's clear that the
meaning the nursing home.
The defense here, the nursing home would have won eventually just because of the way the law is within the False Claims Act, especially with worthless services cases. But that would have been really hard to get to. So they would have had to continue litigating. I think it's clear the district judge didn't like them. And so in order to get that win, you would have had to have litigated for another several years, find a way to get up to the Third Circuit where maybe you get a good panel, maybe you don't. And so that's the big takeaway, Meg, that I think your listeners may, is a lot of times just the way that this works, litigating these matters and it is really expensive, and sometimes settling when you don't think you should settle is the better business decision. Because again, years of litigating is a really expensive proposition. You're taking a lot of risk, and there's no guarantee at the end of this that you win. Maybe you get up to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court says, no, we're going to resurrect worthless services and we're going to go with that. And so here you're thinking $1 settlement that you get to pay over the course of a year, a low multiplier. I mean, this was actually a really good settlement when you think about what their other options were. They were in discovery after losing the motion to dismiss. They were in discovery for almost 2 full years. And that's really expensive. At some point, people just say, I want to be done with this. What can we do to be done with this right now? And they got a good deal out of DOJ. I think that's what happened here is they just got worn down.
Yeah. I think that is something that's really important and maybe defines one of the many qualities of a good lawyer is, continuing to revisit that with your client about, I frame it more as like, what is winning to you? I think when you're dealing with the FCA, it never feels like winning, right? But conceptually, it's like, what matters to you? Because there are some people, ride or die, principles, everything. And I think like you see the AseraCare case that went on for like 11 years or something. I mean, a super long time and all the twists and turns and all that stuff. And yes, expense is one of them, but also just like the emotional burden of these cases, like your ability to, you ever want to sell your business? Like, you got to get out from under this. And so I think it's really important. I mean, not that you don't want to just throw the towel right away because that looks like, not the right thing. But I think even in like our audit cases, even in other kinds of things, I think it's really important for lawyers to always talk about, and lawyers get a bad rap. It's like, oh, well, it's not in your personal interest for me to settle this because you make more money. And it's like, why would I ever want there's more than enough work to have. I want you to lawyers don't make the decisions, right? They implement decisions their clients make. And, but I think having those business discussions with your client, and I always talk too about showing them the runway early on. So even when we get, again, not FCA, but like audit work, like how long is this going to take? What's it going to look like? How much do things cost? Like giving them a sense. And then you can keep revisiting that because you never want the first time someone hears something to be like, what? Because you just, and I, in my 25 years working with lawyers, I mean, I think that some do that better than others. And I think it's really appreciated because as lawyers, and you hear this a lot in your practice because it's so expensive, you don't have a lot of control. Government has all of the power and the leverage. And so, you sort of have to do it. It's very different than other kinds of litigation where, there's maybe a meeting of the minds earlier on the process. But I think like DOJ, it just has a different mindset. I mean, they have different power. They have different freedoms than, if you're doing a class action lawsuit and it's like, I don't want to lose my shirt. I'm just trying to get a little bit of money for everyone. I mean, there's different motivations. So, yeah, I guess a reminder that always working with the Department of Justice and seeing these settlements, as I say to clients all the time, I mean, just because something's happening to you does not mean you did anything wrong,
Sure.
right? And the beginning of the story is not the end of the story. And the settlement isn't really the end of the story. It's not the truth, right? It's like a business decision that's made to settle something. And so I think that's always important to remember when you see headlines is that's not means that someone's guilty of whatever. It's just like, I need to get done with this.
Yeah, Meg, I've yet to have a client who says in our first meeting, "Let's settle." I
Yeah.
want to settle this. I want to pay the government a ton of money. No one goes into representation saying that. But over time, you start to have these frank conversations with them where you say, "Look, we're talking years here, and here's the way I think someone could view these documents that we're seeing, these emails that we're seeing, and so let's talk about business decisions." And whether you want to keep throwing money at this, me personally, I've got a lot of cases where I feel really strongly that from a policy level, this is not something that should result in DOJ enforcement. There are just other mechanisms out there that are better than the False Claims Act, which is a tremendous hammer. And I would love to litigate those for the next 10 years, 15 years. But it's not my money. These are our clients' dollars that are at stake, and it's their risk. And so that's the biggest thing. Exactly what you're saying, Meg, is walking clients through. Here's what this looks like. Here's the risk. Here's how long it's going to take. And what people oftentimes don't understand is these things take a lot of time. They're about once a week. I hear from clients saying, "How long is this going to take?" And they almost never like my answer. We have zero control over how long this takes. DOJ is going to take as long as they want to. And there's no like magic button where you push it and all of a sudden DOJ makes a decision. So these things do take time. I posted about this one case on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago. The 11th Circuit a few weeks back affirmed dismissal of a 15-year-old key tam. 15-year-old key tam. DOJ took 10 years to investigate that before making a decision, and then they litigated it for 5 years. These things take such a long time, and so sometimes ending it is a really nice thing. You're not going to be happy ending it. You're not going to be happy with the DOJ press release saying that you're accused of doing something wrong, but sometimes it's good to end things.
And I guess last question on these settlements, which I'm sure there's a lot of standard language, we see in those settlements, but you were essentially getting a release as it relates to, I mean, I know they try to keep doors open somehow, but what are you released from when you settle this with the government?
Yeah, you're released from someone coming back and saying you violated the False Claims Act or various other theories like payment by mistake for the exact claims that you are releasing. And so you are buying a release from that. You're not getting a release from criminal conduct. And so if DOJ for some reason comes back and says, well, now we think this was criminal, you're not releasing that. You're not releasing administrative remedies. There's going to be a big one. If you ever look at a DOJ settlement agreement, there's a big long list of things that you are not releasing. And Meg, you mentioned this one. There's language in settlement agreements that DOJ is authorized to put in there that says that these claims are allegations only, and disputed by the other side. DOJ will usually put that in a press release saying that there's been no determination of liability. And no one reads that in press releases. All they do is they read the top level thing and say, oh, they must have committed all of the fraud without realizing. No, these are just still disputed points. We're not admitting to anything unless you're in the District of Massachusetts where they make you admit to stuff, which I think is wrong. But that's a different podcast.
Wow. Oh, yeah. Well, that's the thing with litigation. I don't think you ever feel good after it's
Never.
done. I remember talking to a young lawyer once and who wanted to do litigation, and she said she wanted to do litigation because you help people solve problems. I was like, litigation's not really about solving problems. It's about, I don't know that anyone feels really vindicated. I mean, litigation, whatever kind, it takes an emotional toll. And, even in our audit world, I mean, even if we win 100%, people don't feel good. I mean, I've been jumping down. I won a $40 million case, and the CEO is sort of lackluster because it's like, well, why did this ever happen to begin with? So, like, even when you're, quote, vindicated, you're like, why did I have to go through this pain and suffering and spend all this money and do all that stuff? And so, obviously, you never want to have to get in these situations to begin with, because even if you're past it, it never feels good. So,
yeah, it's still bad. That 15-year-old Keaton I was talking about, yes, they won. They don't have to pay the government or a whistleblower any money. You still paid 15 years worth of legal fees. Like that's a weird kind of win. And so, yeah, no, very, very, very seldom is someone coming out at the other end and saying, yep, I feel great about this. This is super. It's all just, it's shades of sad.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's your life. Shades of sad, Jonathan.
Shades of sad. That's right.
But intellectually interesting,
yes,
nonetheless. So,
but Meg, I think, one of the important things to me is process. And when I was at DOJ, I was surprised how often defendants would come to me after a sentencing or after we had resolved some FCA thing. And they'd say, look, I just appreciate you approached this in a very fair manner. You had your views and you heard mine. I appreciate that. That's the thing that I think, educating clients on, here's the process, here's why it works this way. And just when things could go worse and it's not going worse because you're steering them in a different direction, I think clients do appreciate that. So there is some gratitude at the end of a lot of my representations where we're not thrilled with everything that's happened, but at least clients appreciate that it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah. Again, the dark cloud.
Yeah.
Lawyers, well, it could have been a lot worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
They wonder why lawyers are such, melancholy people sometimes, right? Like, we deal with problems a lot, and then it's like winning is like gray sad instead of dark sad. Oh, on that really melancholy note. Well, thanks for taking the time. It's interesting. I'm glad you don't think that this is, a new old thing we're going to be seeing moving forward. And the settlement, as you explained, isn't any sign of the veracity of the theory of liability. It's just probably a business decision. Like, let's move on.
It's waving the white flag after getting a really good 1.25 times multiplier is really, 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 really good. And that's what they got here. And so kudos. The defense did a good job here. I think this was just a good business decision. But yeah, not a sign, hopefully not a sign of things to come. Doesn't mean that hospices are in the clear. There's just other things that they'll be investigated for besides worthless services.
Yeah, I would echo that a million times, because I think, on our earlier podcast when we were talking about, healthcare fraud is like a huge priority for DOJ. I think that also means it's a huge priority. Like, hospice just continues to be in the headlines. And I don't think that pendulum is going to swing back to we're not first on the list or something for some time. So hopefully that will change, but I don't know when. So
who knows?
But anyway, well, awesome. Thank you for your time. And this was fun. Even
Thanks,
if
Meg.
it's
I enjoyed
it. Take care.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Hospice Insights, The Law and Beyond. Thank you for joining the conversation. To subscribe to our podcast, visit our website at hushblackwell.com or sign up wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, may the wind be at your back.